Clara sat by the bay window, the afternoon sun dappling the worn velvet of her favourite armchair. Outside, the majestic oak in her backyard unfurled its newest lime-green leaves, a vibrant testament to spring's relentless promise. Her gaze drifted, not truly seeing the world beyond the glass, but rather peering into the shadowed corridors of her own past. Lately, these journeys into memory were her only escape, a fragile solace from the unyielding grip of her current predicament. Life, as she'd known it, felt like a distant shore, fading into an unreachable haze. Every shift in the old farmhouse was an arduous climb. Moving from the kitchen's warm, inviting heart to the quiet refuge of her bedroom was a marathon. The gleaming crutches, once a symbol of fleeting support, now felt like cruel extensions of her own agony, each step sending jolts of protest through her weakened frame. And Daniel, her husband of 5 years, seemed to regard her with nothing but a cool, detached impatience. This bewildering nightmare had been her constant companion for nearly 3 months now. Often in the quiet solitude of her days, Clara would drift back to a past sharply divided into 2 stark chapters. The first was a canvas she preferred to keep veiled, yet its shadowy outlines stubbornly clung to the edges of her consciousness. According to Mrs. Gable, the kind woman who'd managed the orphanage, Clara had arrived there a bewildered toddler of 2. She'd been a spirited, bright-eyed little girl, full of curiosity, yet it wasn't until her 5th birthday that her new parents walked through the heavy wooden doors of the orphanage. Evelyn and Thomas Dixon were respected architects in the bustling city, their names synonymous with both integrity and innovation. Clara wanted for absolutely nothing. She possessed the finest hand-stitched dresses, a playroom overflowing with whimsical wooden toys, access to the best private academies, and meals that were always prepared with a mother's careful hand. Every summer, without fail, her parents would whisk her away to the sandy shores of Seabreeze Point, where she would spend a glorious month frolicking in the sparkling azure waves, the salt air invigorating her very soul. But more than the lavish gifts or exotic travels, it was the profound sense of belonging, of being cherished within a complete loving family, that nourished her spirit. In return, she offered them only her unwavering affection and the sweet music of her laughter. After graduating with distinction, she effortlessly gained admission to the prestigious university, though to her sorrow, Evelyn and Thomas didn't live to witness her proud walk across the graduation stage. First, her mother, Evelyn, had faded with a heartbreaking swiftness, her vibrant spirit dimming like a candle caught in a sudden cruel gust of wind. Within a single agonizing month, the once striking woman, known for her vibrant red scarves and infectious laugh, rapidly aged, enduring excruciating pain in the familiar comfort of their sun-filled home. Her father Thomas, seeing the swift current pulling his beloved wife away, had steadfastly refused any outside help. No nurses, no sterile hospital rooms. He cared for her himself, every tender moment, until her final, peaceful breath. The insidious tendrils of cancer had been discovered far too late, and even their considerable fortune, accumulated over decades of dedication, couldn't bargain with fate. One crisp autumn evening, her heart aflutter with a new kind of excitement, she eagerly told him about a young man she had met on campus, a graduate student named Daniel, who was a couple of years her senior. She recounted with a shy smile how they had quite literally collided near the grand oak tree by the library, spilling books and apologies. Then how he had patiently waited for her until her last class, walking her all the way back to their familiar yellow Victorian house. Pausing for dramatic effect, her cheeks flushed with a hopeful blush, she proudly announced that he had invited her for coffee, and she was absolutely thrilled because she found him incredibly charming, with eyes as kind as her father's. Her father Thomas looked at her then, his gaze a complex blend of concern and a fragile pride. "Clara, my sweet girl," he began, his voice raspy, "please be careful with these young men. They can be cunning and sometimes deceitful. And you, my dear, you are a desirable young woman with a substantial legacy. They might try to sweep you off your feet, only to take everything. As long as I'm here, you are safe, but if anything happens to me, stay vigilant, my little dove." Clara leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his weathered cheek. "Oh, Papa," she murmured, her voice filled with a daughter's unwavering love. "Please don't fret over such things. Everything will be perfectly fine. You'll still be here to walk me down the aisle and give any bad suitor a proper grilling. But I'm not in a rush, not at all. There are no worthy candidates yet, and besides, I still have to finish my studies, remember?" A few quiet days later, her father, waiting for her by the front porch swing as she returned from university, gestured for her to sit beside him. With a voice that trembled ever so slightly, he spoke words that would forever echo in her heart. "Clara, I can't imagine living much longer without your mother. I have this profound feeling, a knowing in my soul, that I'll follow her soon. But know this, my precious girl, we love you more than words can say, and always will watch over you, even after we're gone. You must live a full, worthy life, and I pray with all my heart that we've provided you with everything you need to do just that." Clara felt a sudden hot rush of tears spill down her cheeks. She instinctively wrapped her arms around him, pleading, "Papa, no! Don't say such terrible things! You have to live! You promised you wanted to see me married, and to bounce your grandchildren on your knee." Clara couldn't fully grasp the weighty significance of his words at that moment, not truly. But 2 short months later, when her father passed away peacefully in his sleep, she understood with a chilling clarity. It was as if he had possessed some profound, innate sense of his impending departure. She struggled to comprehend how a man who had seemed so robust, so full of quiet strength, could simply cease breathing. But it had happened. The evening before, they had shared a typical comforting dinner in the cosy sunlit kitchen, the aroma of her father's famous beef stew lingering in the air. Clara had chattered about her university adventures, light-heartedly mentioning Daniel, who had become her regular escort home, a familiar, welcome presence. She had even mused aloud about inviting him over soon, for her father to meet him properly. The next morning, when Clara didn't find her father in the kitchen at his usual early hour, a cold dread began to coil in her stomach. She rushed to his bedroom, a desperate hope fluttering in her chest that he was simply sleeping in. But a deeper, darker certainty whispered that something was terribly wrong. As she stood by his bedside, the morning light painting soft stripes across the antique quilt, the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. He was gone. "Father! Oh, my dear, dear father! Please wake up!" the young woman whispered, her voice a raw, broken plea, gently touching his still shoulder. The coldness beneath her fingertips delivered the final crushing realization. The coldness beneath her fingertips delivered the final crushing realization. This would never happen again. From that moment on, everything felt like a terrible, surreal nightmare. Even the funeral service itself, held under the sombre stained glass windows of Grace Chapel, remained a blur of muted colours and hushed voices. If it weren't for Daniel, who barely left her side, a steady, comforting anchor in her storm of grief, she might not have surfaced from the crushing depths of her despair. Yet life, in its relentless flow, continued. Though Clara never imagined that her easy camaraderie with Daniel, that gentle friendship, would blossom into marriage, and then, so swiftly after, lead to her being confined to a wheelchair. It happened on a perfectly clear Tuesday afternoon, on a smooth stretch of highway winding through the redwood forest. Despite her considerable driving experience, her father had gifted her the sleek silver sedan for her 21st birthday, and she had obtained her licence that same year after completing her rigorous training. She lost control. In the 8 years since, she had never received a single parking ticket, let alone been involved in an accident. Nevertheless, tragedy had struck, leaving her largely bedridden for what felt like an eternity. During those long, lonely months of recovery, Clara often wept, thinking sadly about how her parents would have showered her with unwavering support and gentle encouragement, so unlike Daniel. For the 2 months she spent recuperating at home, confined to the quiet stillness of their apartment, he had been constantly irritable, his gaze often sharp, as if blaming her for the cruel hand fate had dealt. That day, much like countless others, Daniel returned home with a familiar dark scowl etched upon his face. His eyes, usually so kind, now held a cold, assessing glint as he surveyed the modest living room before entering the smaller sunroom where Clara usually sat. Instead of a greeting, a warmth, he muttered, his voice a low, bitter rasp. "How long do you intend to sit there playing the helpless victim? Is it too much to ask for a greeting when your husband comes home? Some women, even those with far greater challenges, manage to be perfect wives and look utterly flawless. I saw a segment on a morning show today about a woman who ironed her husband's shirts with her feet. Everyone else has a normal, capable wife, but mine is just a lazy burden." He slammed the door with a jarring thud as he left, the sound echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence of the room. Clara fought back the hot, insistent tears, utterly unable to comprehend what monstrous wrong she had committed. Ever since the accident, instead of offering solace or a comforting touch, her husband seemed to take a perverse pleasure in daily insults and subtle humiliations. After spewing his venom, he would retreat to another room, leaving Clara adrift in a sea of guilt she couldn't possibly understand or deserve. She felt she had no recourse but to endure this cruel treatment, for she was now entirely dependent on Daniel. She often recalled her father's prescient warnings not to trust men too easily, but now it was irrevocably too late. While she was still in the hospital, navigating the agonizing haze of recovery, Daniel had visited almost daily, his voice a soothing balm, gently persuading her to transfer her parents' business into his name. He had been so attentive, so seemingly caring, holding her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her skin. "Darling," he had whispered, his words a comforting melody, "you are so very weak, and you need rest and complete care. The company's affairs, as you know, require daily unwavering attention. Who better than me to oversee them? to protect what your parents built. I hope you trust me. In 5 years of marriage, have I ever given you reason not to? Transfer the business to me, and I promise to keep you informed of every single detail. As soon as you recover your strength, you can take the reins again. I swear." This, Clara would soon realise with a crushing certainty, had been her gravest mistake. A decision she would come to regret with every fibre of her being. But it was not Daniel's only, nor his final betrayal. He returned home that day not alone, but with a small, dishevelled boy clinging uncertainly to his side. Pushing the child gently into Clara's sunroom, Daniel announced, his voice devoid of warmth, "You will live with this woman and take care of her. I've settled everything with your stepfather. He sold you to me for a few $100, a pittance." Glaring at Clara with a chilling, raw hatred in his eyes, he added, "Now you have some company, don't you? Since you couldn't give me children of my own, you can look after someone else's. Help each other out, since no one needs either of you. And by the way, his name is Finn." Clara struggled desperately to hold back the torrent of tears that threatened to overwhelm her. Her husband knew intimately how painful the subject of children was for her. From the very first day of their marriage, she had done everything humanly possible, endured countless tests and treatments to conceive, but it had never happened. Now, Daniel seemed to delight in tormenting her with this deepest of wounds. She was utterly astonished, truly, at how profoundly he had changed since the day she had signed those damning documents, transferring her family's legacy. The loving, gentle man who had once showered her with fragrant white roses and tender words had morphed into a cruel, unfeeling tyrant. A couple of hours after Daniel brought the small boy into her room, he returned. Clara was gently talking to Finn, trying to coax more about his story from his frightened eyes. "Well, you two misfits," Daniel sneered, his lips curling into a cruel parody of a smile. "Now you can take care of each other, can't you? And I, dear wife, can finally be with the woman I truly love." Behind Daniel, a slender woman with cascading golden curls and impossibly tall sparkling amethyst heels stepped into the sunroom. The sight of her, so brazenly brought into their shared sanctuary, sent a cold shiver down Clara's spine. This scoundrel had the unmitigated audacity to parade his mistress through their home, a place that, despite its current chill, still echoed with the ghosts of her parents' love. Clara stared, a searing heat rising behind her eyes, tears pressing against the fragile dam of her composure. But she wouldn't break. Not now, not in front of her faithless husband and his paramour. Instead, with a sharp, almost imperceivable turn, she fixed her gaze out the window, focusing on the distant, hazy outline of the mountains. Clara had braced herself for many things from Daniel: disappointment, neglect, perhaps even a quiet drifting apart. But this open, cruel betrayal was a wound deeper than any physical injury. It was a calculated cruelty, to exploit her vulnerability, to steal her parents' beloved architectural firm, and then to cast her aside in her most desperate hour. Yet Daniel had grievously underestimated Clara's keen mind. During her long solitary days of convalescence, she had replayed the accident countless times, dissecting every chilling detail. The sudden, inexplicable brake failure in her silver sedan. It now clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. It could have been meticulously orchestrated by her husband. If she had perished, he would have inherited everything her parents had so painstakingly built and left to her. When he discovered she had survived the fiery crash, albeit severely injured, his initial shock had morphed into a barely contained fury. This sickening realization, the shift in his demeanour, only solidified her growing conviction of his sinister involvement in the tragedy that had so nearly claimed her life. Feeling a fragile stir of strength deep within her, Clara had begun a secret, rigorous regimen of recovery, completely unbeknownst to Daniel. For the past 2.5 weeks, she had been diligently performing the physical therapy exercises prescribed by her kindly doctor during their last consultation, several times a day, pushing through the lingering discomfort. Her fierce determination to reclaim her mobility, to stand on her own 2 feet again, was a powerful, burning ember in her soul. By the end of the first week, she could manage several tentative steps unaided, a small, triumphant victory. By the end of the second week, Clara could effortlessly navigate all 6 rooms of their apartment without the aid of her crutches or a single pause. Yet, whenever Daniel's presence loomed, she remained steadfastly in her armchair by the window, maintaining the careful illusion that her condition had not improved in the slightest. It was uncertain how events might have unfolded had it not been for her husband's final, unforgivable treachery. Daniel's brazen infidelity was the ultimate shattering blow for Clara, the final shard of glass in her heart. As the door clicked shut behind the scoundrel, who had taken his mistress's arm with an arrogant flourish, Clara turned her gaze from the distant mountains to Finn, still sitting quietly in the worn armchair beside her. A wave of profound sadness washed over her, not for herself, but for this small, bewildered soul. "Well, little one," she said softly, her voice remarkably steady, "it seems luck isn't on your side with him either. Everything that villain promised won't come to pass. You don't need to look after me. I'm leaving." With that, to Finn's wide-eyed surprise, she rose abruptly from the chair, her movements fluid and strong. She walked purposefully towards the grand mahogany wardrobe that spanned the entire wall, a piece inherited from her grandmother, and began quickly, methodically, packing her belongings into a sturdy canvas travel bag. Then she knelt before Finn, taking his small, surprisingly calloused hand in hers. Her voice was gentle, infused with a new-found resolve. "You know what, sweetheart? Why don't you come with me? You seem like a truly wonderful child, and with your stepfather, well, you'll have no real life. He'll just keep drinking away his days and making you work for anyone who'll pay a few dollars. But I have a small house, a cottage nestled in the countryside, near Whispering Pines. We can live there, and once I get my affairs in order, I'd like to adopt you, to be your mother, if you'll have me." Clara knew instinctively that the boy had no one but his brutish, alcoholic stepfather. Finn looked at her, his young face etched with a maturity beyond his years, and replied with surprising solemnity, "You are kind, Miss Clara, and I love adventures. I've only ever been to my Grandma Rose's little farm when she was still alive, so yes, let's go. But why did you pretend to be sick?" Clara ruffled his soft, sandy brown hair and offered a small, sad smile. "I had my reasons, sweet boy. Well, let's find something to eat before our journey, and then we'll be on our way." Within a couple of hours, they were seated on a greyhound bus, the rhythm of the road a gentle hum. Finn, his head resting trustingly on Clara's shoulder, quickly drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. The journey was long, stretching into the twilight hours, and Clara, covering the child's thin shoulders with her soft indigo-blue cardigan, also closed her eyes. She did not know what lay ahead, truly, but she understood with profound clarity that her life was once again divided into before and after. Meanwhile, Daniel, likely intending to gloat over his supposedly helpless wife again, arrived back at their apartment the very next day with his new companion. They were shocked when they found the place utterly deserted, with only the discarded gleaming crutches and the empty armchair by the window as mute witnesses. "That wretched woman!" Daniel hissed, his face contorted with a venomous rage. His mistress, a flicker of unease in her eyes, immediately embraced him, cooing, "Never mind, darling. Forget about that fool. You have me now, a woman who truly appreciates you." But he roughly shoved her away, the unexpected force sending her stumbling backward. He strode to the window, snatching the crutches from the floor, his grip like a vice. "You don't understand anything," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "She was supposed to be completely helpless after the accident, a broken bird, but she lied to me. Look how well she can move around without any help at all." He angrily hurled the crutches to the floor, the metal clanging sharply against the polished wood, nearly striking his mistress's leg. She flinched, a gasp catching in her throat, her face paling with sudden terror. She looked at the man who had seemed so charming, so gentle, with a chilling new-found dread. In that raw moment, she likely regretted every one of her glittering fantasies of a future with such an unstable, volatile man. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away from Daniel's raging fury, Clara and Finn were already settling into their new home. Clara had sensed with an almost prescient intuition that this remote country cottage could serve as her sanctuary. And she had purchased it on a whim, following an impulse just weeks before the accident. The house was very old, built more than half a century ago, a testament to simpler times, but it was remarkably sturdy and lovingly constructed. Clara carefully inserted the old-fashioned brass key into the slightly rusted lock, and to her pleasant surprise it turned with an easy, welcoming click. She took Finn's small hand in hers, and together they cautiously pushed open the heavy wooden door. As they stepped inside, both took a deep, fortifying breath, inhaling the comforting, earthy scent of dried wild flowers and sweet pine needles, a fragrance that instantly reminded Clara of warm, joyful Christmases past. Despite a thick velvety layer of dust and a few delicate cobwebs spun like intricate lace, the house felt remarkably clean, as if a watchful spirit had simply stepped away. The beds in both rooms were covered with vibrant, hand-stitched patchwork quilts and neatly arranged plump pillows. Old sepia-toned photographs of unknown smiling faces adorned the walls, each one a silent story. The meticulous, almost reverent arrangement of everything suggested that a very tidy artistic woman, skilled in handicrafts, had once called this place home. The kitchen table was covered with a brightly patterned oilcloth, and, invitingly, a small ceramic teapot and a dish filled with colourful, hard candies sat waiting as if for guests. Finn's eyes lit up. He eagerly grabbed one of the sweets, quickly unwrapped it and popped it into his mouth, a small sigh of pure contentment escaping him. Clara gently admonished him, a soft smile touching her lips. "Finn, your hands are quite dusty, and we should eat something proper first. Besides, we need to tidy up a bit, don't we?" The boy, a flicker of mischief in his eyes, quickly hid the wrapper in his pocket and approached her with a serious, earnest expression. "I can see you're well prepared, Miss Clara, and I think you'll make a fine mother. I agree. Adopt me as your son, please." Clara couldn't help but let out a soft, genuine laugh, and the boy looked at her in surprise, perhaps unaccustomed to such a joyful sound. Composing herself, she gently patted his head. "Of course I'll adopt you, sweet boy, but let's get settled in first. For now, let's find something substantial to eat. You wash your hands, and I'll prepare something delicious." Within minutes, the boy was eagerly devouring a fragrant, fluffy cheese omelette, washing it down with sweet apple cinnamon tea. He ate with such unbridled enthusiasm, as if it were a gourmet delicacy he had never tasted before. When his plate was spotless, he even used a piece of crusty bread to meticulously mop up the very last savoury crumb. Finn looked at Clara, his dark eyes brimming with a depth of gratitude that pierced her heart. "I haven't eaten this well in a very long time," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My grandfather, Nick, would only hit me and never thought to feed me. He just drank himself into a stupor. You, on the other hand, even though you're a stranger to me and only recently took me in, you've got food, and you're so kind. Our home will be just as good as anyone else's, won't it?" The little boy's mature, hopeful words touched Clara's heart deeply, stirring a profound sense of purpose within her. But she replied with a touch of practical sadness. "Well, this is hardly a proper home yet, little one. There's no hot water for baths, the old television might not even work, and we're quite far from the city. We don't even know if there are any schools nearby, and you'll need to start your education again soon." "Unfortunately," Clara admitted, her voice low, "my husband Daniel has taken every cent from my family, earned every penny, and it's highly unlikely he'll ever return it. I have to be incredibly careful now, just to make sure he doesn't manage to find the last few dollars I've quietly tucked away." Finn, who had been sitting thoughtfully on his stool, suddenly hopped down. He padded over to Clara, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist, and whispered fiercely in her ear, "Don't be afraid, Miss Clara. I'm here now, and I know how to fight. If he dares to come near, I'll beat him up." As if to punctuate his point, he stepped back and began flailing his little fists in the air, like a tiny, determined whirlwind. Clara, gently wiping a lone tear that had traced a path down her cheek, burst into a genuine, heartfelt laugh. In that moment, a profound gratitude swelled within her that her treacherous husband, in his cruelty, had inadvertently gifted her this wonderful, fierce little boy. That evening they joyfully splashed water and sang off-key tunes as they meticulously cleaned the entire cottage. Exhausted but bubbling with a quiet happiness, they finally fell asleep on the crisp, clean white bed linens they had discovered in an ancient cedar chest of drawers. Everything they found, from the neatly folded towels to the sweet scent of lavender, confirmed that the previous owner had been meticulously clean and cherished her home. From the very next morning, Clara and Finn eagerly began exploring the surrounding area. A small, enchanting forest just beyond the cottage captivated them both. Each towering pine tree seemed ancient, holding the silent secrets of generations. They had already learned from a friendly villager, Mrs. Holmes, that there was a small general store on the outskirts of the village, and one day visited it together. When they made their purchases, Clara said, and playfully nudged the boy, "Finn, why don't you offer to take that bag of groceries from the lady and help her carry it home? We're going that way anyway." After buying fragrant, crusty bread and fresh milk, they accompanied Mrs. Holmes to her charming little home. Along the way they chatted easily, and Mrs. Holmes shared that she had lived in the area her entire life. She'd met her beloved Robert at a dance in the country seat, back when they were both studying. She was at the local nursing school, and he was a year ahead, pursuing his passion for teaching. After graduation, Mrs. Holmes chose to stay home and care for their newborn son, while her husband, Robert, continued his education to become a high school principal. At this point, the elderly woman paused her story, a wistful look in her eyes, and quietly dabbed away a tear with a delicate lace handkerchief tucked into her pocket of her hand-knitted cream cardigan. Clara and Finn exchanged a silent, understanding glance, but remained respectful, walking quietly until they reached a neatly maintained fence, vibrant with climbing honeysuckle vines. "Well, my dears, here we are," Mrs. Holmes said with a warm smile, then continued, "You know, I simply can't let such a helpful young man go without offering some tea and a little treat. You both must be tired after your long walk. Please come in. Don't be shy." Clara gently opened the rustic wooden gate and entered first, waiting for her new friends to follow, before securing the gate behind them. Inside Mrs. Holmes's home, everything was immaculately clean and wonderfully inviting. Despite the older, well-loved furniture, the rooms felt bright and meticulously maintained, thanks to a recent, albeit modest, renovation. On the kitchen table, draped with a delicate crocheted lace tablecloth, sat a small ceramic bowl filled with glistening, dried apple slices. Finn's eyes widened at the sight, and he looked questioningly at Clara. Noticing his gaze, their kind hostess chuckled softly. "Go ahead and try one, dear. Even dried, they're still perfectly delicious and good for you. I'll make you both some hot tea with a dollop of jam made from these very same wonderful apples. Last year's harvest was so abundant. I have enough preserved to last until next autumn." They spent a long, comfortable time that afternoon, savouring the fragrant tea and the delicious apple treats, each slice seemingly infused with the sweetness of sunshine. The elderly woman, seemingly eager for company and a listening ear, shared more stories about her life. "My husband became a wonderful high school principal after his studies, and I worked as a labour and delivery nurse at the same county hospital for many years. We lived a truly blessed life, raising our son, Michael. He was an absolute angel, quiet, always thoughtful and healthy as could be. By the age of 2, he would joyfully recite nursery rhymes to us whenever he could, his little voice so sweet." The woman fell silent, her eyes welling with a deep sadness, as if she might break down at any moment. Clara, her heart aching in sympathy, softly asked, "Why do you speak of him in the past tense, Mrs. Holmes? Did something happen to him?" Taking a corner of her soft embroidered scarf, which was draped gracefully around her neck, Mrs. Holmes dabbed gently at the corners of her eyes and continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength. Michael, he's gone now, dear. He was such a brilliant boy, finishing high school with just 1 B on his record. He was accepted into medical school without any competition, just like that. He also wanted to help people, just like his father and I always tried to do. That's where our boy met his love. They were in the same class. We weren't overly fond of Bethany, if I'm honest, but we always respected our son's choices. We thought that if they loved each other he would be happy, and that was what mattered most." Mrs. Holmes sighed, a long, weary sound, and continued, "Well, their wedding was as lovely as any fairy tale. You should have seen how beautiful they looked. Michael so handsome in his suit, Bethany like a vision in her white dress. Robert and I couldn't take our eyes off them, truly." Mrs. Holmes fell silent once more, her hand again bringing the trembling corner of her scarf to her eyes. In that moment she seemed to recall something, and her gaze softened as she gently addressed Finn. "My dear, you must be dreadfully bored listening to our old adult conversations. Let me show you something. Look under the bed in my spare bedroom. the one with the blue floral wallpaper, and pull out the large, dusty wooden chest there." The boy, who had been listening with surprising stillness, seemed to have been waiting for this very moment. He eagerly rushed to the old bed, and without hesitation dropped to his knees. Within seconds, only his little sneakers were visible from under the bed. With a grunt of satisfaction, he pulled out a cardboard box, his eyes gleaming with pure childlike curiosity. "Open it quickly, dear," Mrs. Holmes said with a warm smile when he returned into the kitchen, carrying his treasure. "It will make your time much more enjoyable." The boy settled into the living room with his discovered treasures, and Mrs. Holmes explained to Clara, "These are the toys of my grandson, Oscar. When he was little, he could spend hours playing with this box. Now he's grown up, and he hasn't been here in about 10 years. I keep everything, these little red toy cars, fuzzy animals, and other childhood trinkets, just in case he ever decides to visit." Clara asked timidly, her voice hushed, "Mrs. Holmes, forgive me, but what exactly happened to your son, Michael?" Immediately regretting her bluntness, she quickly added, "If it's too painful, please, you don't have to answer, but I find myself wanting to know more about you." The elderly woman placed her wrinkled, trembling hands flat on the polished kitchen table. "It's been so many years now," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "Almost 25 since my Michael was taken from us. He was murdered. That day he was returning from his evening shift. After they got married, he and Bethany lived in Pineville, a bustling district town. By then our grandson Oscar had already been born, a tiny bright spark in our lives. It was deep winter, and the afternoon light faded so quickly," she continued, her gaze distant. "Michael must have decided to take a shortcut through the old community park. That's where they found him. My poor boy lay there for hours, bleeding from a head wound, with no one to help him. The scoundrel who did it took his fine leather briefcase, his engraved watch, and even his wallet. The doctors said his injuries were catastrophic. Even if someone had been there, a whole team of paramedics, they couldn't have saved him. The worst part, the absolute worst, is that they never found the monster who did it. He could be still out there, living his life, while my Michael is just gone." A ragged sob, a deep moan of ancient grief, tore from the woman's chest. Clara reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Mrs. Holmes's, offering silent, unwavering support. She immediately regretted stirring such a raw and painful memory. The elderly woman looked at her with profound gratitude, her eyes swimming with unshed tears, and continued, "After we buried Michael, my husband Robert's health declined so rapidly. His world had crumbled, and I felt the same crushing despair, but I knew I had to keep living for both of us. Just a year later I buried my beloved husband. He died of a sudden heart attack, right there at the school. I was left utterly alone in this house. I couldn't bear to continue working where I had spent so many years alongside my husband, so I retired." Seeing the unspoken question in Clara's eyes, a flicker of curiosity about Michael's wife and child, Mrs. Holmes added, "Yes, Michael left behind a wife and child, but our daughter-in-law Bethany, she never truly cared for us, not even when our son was alive. After his death, she simply forgot about us completely. She was a beautiful woman, always focused on her own life, and she didn't mourn her husband for long. Within a year she remarried to a wealthy businessman from France, or maybe Germany, I can't quite remember, and moved abroad, vanishing without a trace." Clara looked at this small, frail woman, her heart aching with empathy, and marvelled at all the heartache and loss she had endured. Her own recent problems, in comparison, suddenly seemed almost trivial, fleeting clouds against a vast stormy sky. That evening, Mrs. Holmes, clearly finding solace in sharing her story, opened up completely. But ever gracious, she also tactfully inquired, "And what brings you two to these parts, dear? I can see you're a city woman with your elegant way of dressing and that beautiful hair." Clara smiled, a genuine easy smile. "We decided to immerse ourselves in the charms of rural life, Mrs. Holmes, and so far we have no regrets whatsoever." She winked playfully at Finn, who was happily absorbed in the toy cars on the floor, and he, with comical seriousness, winked back with both eyes. "We should be going, my friend," she said to the boy, a new warmth in her voice. "Gather up your treasures, and let's head home before it gets dark." At the gate they parted ways with Mrs. Holmes like old friends, promising to visit her regularly. From that day forward, Clara and Finn often stopped by Mrs. Holmes's cosy home. On one such crisp autumn visit, they were surprised to find a well-dressed man in his late 30s sitting at the small kitchen table with the elderly woman. His face, to Clara's discerning eye, seemed subtly unpleasant, almost repulsive, with a harsh, piercing gaze that lingered a moment too long. "Oh, my dears, you're here!" Mrs. Holmes exclaimed joyfully, her eyes lighting up. "Meet my grandson, Oscar. He's come to visit. He's all grown up and changed so much. Can you believe it? Clara, I barely recognised him. I thought I'd never see him again after all these years." The old woman bustled about, setting out extra plates and forks, insisting Clara and Finn stay for lunch. Throughout the meal, Mrs. Holmes's grandson sat in sullen, stony silence, loudly stirring sugar into his tea, his irritation palpable. It was abundantly clear he was not pleased with their presence. Trying to smooth over the thick awkwardness, the elderly woman softly said, "Oscar has come to sell the house, you see. He says there are buyers lined up, eager to purchase, and he's promised to buy me a lovely little apartment in Pineville. He says they'll tear down my little house and build some grand country club or luxury cottages here. I'm at a loss. It's so hard to let go of this place. It may not be a mansion, but it's my home, full of precious memories." At that precise moment, the grandson angrily threw his spoon onto the table with a clatter, and raising his voice, nearly shouted, "Why are you so fixated on this old junk, Grandma? We need to sell it while we can still get a good price. Think fast or you'll regret it later. Don't you want to live comfortably in your old age?" He abruptly pushed his chair back with a scrape and stormed out, slamming the door behind him with a resounding thud. Mrs. Holmes looked at the startled Clara, her eyes wide with a flicker of genuine fear. "He was such a quiet boy when he was little," she said, shaking her head sadly. "But now he has such a fiery temper. I don't understand where he gets it from." After a bit more strained conversation, Clara prepared to leave. "Well, Mrs. Holmes, we've had a lovely visit, and we should really be going now," she said gently. "We won't disturb your time with your grandson any longer. Thank you so much for lunch. We'll definitely stop by again tomorrow." As she reached the door, Clara turned back, a thoughtful expression on her face. "And please, Mrs. Holmes, think very carefully about the house. I understand it's your grandson and all, but it's truly a shame to lose it. This is where your entire life has been, and these walls, they hold so many irreplaceable memories." They exchanged goodbyes, and Clara and Finn headed toward the gate. Mrs. Holmes stayed behind to clear the table, her movements slow and heavy. Just as Clara reached the creaking wooden gate, a guttural, angry voice drifted from deep within the sprawling, untended garden. "What am I supposed to do, Mark?" the grandson complained loudly into his phone. "She's being completely stubborn and won't agree to anything. She says she needs to think about it." Clara froze, listening intently, her senses suddenly on high alert as the man continued, his voice laced with frustration. "Yes, she believes I'm her grandson, sure, but she's hesitating about the house. I've promised her the world, that I'll take care of her and buy her an apartment in Pineville, but she's still not budging. I can't just handle her." He paused, a sinister silence hanging in the air, then added, his voice colder, "And now some woman and a kid have seen me. This isn't good." Clara's mind reeled, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The truth hit her instantly. This man was an impostor, not Mrs. Holmes's real grandson, and he was clearly willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to get his hands on her house. Grabbing Finn's hand, she rushed through the gate and began hurrying, as fast as her still recovering leg would allow, toward the local sheriff's station in the centre of the village. However, after just 100 metres, a strong, rough hand grabbed Clara's wrist, twisting it sharply and forcefully turning her around. Standing before her, his face flushed crimson with a mixture of anger and desperation, was the impostor. He leaned in close, his breath hot on her face, and hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" Clara met his furious gaze with an unexpected defiance, her voice clear despite her pounding heart. "To the sheriff's office. You're a swindler, and you should be held accountable for your lies." Suddenly, she felt a sharp, searing pain in her side and looked down in shock to see the glint of a short, wicked knife blade. Her heart sank with a chilling dread as she thought of Finn, his small hand still clutched in hers, unsure of what to do, how to protect him. Sensing her momentary paralysis, the man's grip tightened and he growled, "Make one wrong move and it will be your last move on this earth. Believe me, I'm good at this. I just got out of prison for doing the very same thing to another nosy girl." "Leave her alone!" Finn's small voice, usually so soft, erupted with astonishing ferocity. He lunged at the man, grabbing his arm with surprising strength for a child his size. Seizing the precious opportunity, Clara broke free, scooping Finn into her arms, and tried to run, stumble running down the dusty path. But the man, fueled by rage, lunged after them, a predator closing in. Luckily, several villagers, drawn by the shouts and commotion, rushed from their homes and gardens to the scene. They quickly overpowered the attacker, their faces grim with outrage, binding his hands and feet with whatever they could find. Sturdy leather belts, gardening aprons, even a shirt from one of the men's backs. By the time the county sheriff's deputy arrived, his patrol car, sirens wailing in the distance, the impostor was already completely restrained. The commotion, the shouts, and the flashing lights drew Mrs. Holmes from her house, her face etched with confusion and dawning horror. She looked at the man lying bound on the ground, and then at the dark spreading stain of blood on Clara's cream-coloured blouse. "Oh, dear Lord, what has happened here?" she cried, her voice trembling. "Oscar, my dear, who did this to you?" she cried, rushing forward, her bewildered gaze flickering between the bound man and Clara, who was now surrounded by concerned, murmuring villagers. But after hearing the neighbours' frantic, overlapping accounts of the vicious attack, the truth, stark and brutal, finally dawned on Mrs. Holmes. She turned to the impostor, her eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of sadness and betrayal. "How could you do this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I truly believed you were my grandson." Then turning with urgency to Clara, she urged, "Come with me, quickly. We need to tend to your wound, dear. Finn, are you all right? Sweet boy, you must be so frightened." Back at her cosy home, Mrs. Holmes, her movements surprisingly steady despite her shock, carefully cleaned and dressed the knife wound on Clara's side. As she worked, her eyes kept returning, drawn with an almost magnetic pull, to a distinctive birthmark on Clara's arm, a beautiful, delicate butterfly, with its wings not quite fully spread. The mark had always drawn people's attention, unique and captivating, but the way Mrs. Holmes stared at it was different, almost reverent, as if she was seeing a ghost. After finishing the first aid, the elderly woman gently brought out an old soft plaid flannel shirt. "Here, wear this," she said, her voice thick with emotion, handing it to Clara. "It was my husband's, a favourite of his. Now, let's have a cup of tea, dear, because I have something very, very important to share with you." "Well, my dear child," Mrs. Holmes murmured, her voice laced with an almost disbelieving wonder. As if to prove her point, she turned her wrinkled palms upward before Clara. I delivered you myself with these very hands. It was such a long labour for your poor mother, delivering twins, a real handful. I can't quite recall now which of you sweet sisters arrived first, but those birthmarks of yours, I remembered them for a lifetime. Such marked twins, they're so rare in all of history. And your mark, that little butterfly, it was in the exact same spot on your shoulder. Just one of you had it." All the subsequent days, Clara felt as if she were floating in a disoriented dream. Childhood memories were a hazy blur, but surely she would never have forgotten a sister. Besides, she was absolutely certain that when her adoptive parents had taken her from the children's home, there had been no sister with her. Knowing her kind father and mother, she was convinced they would have taken both girls without hesitation. Clara found herself thinking constantly about her sister, somewhere out there, who likely had no idea of her existence either. She resolved that once she settled all her affairs, dealing with her disastrous divorce and officially adopting Finn, she would, without fail, embark on a determined search for her. After the terrifying incident, Clara and Finn continued their daily visits to Mrs. Holmes, who had truly become like a grandmother to them both. Each time they arrived, they were greeted with warmth and fresh news. "You won't believe it, my dears," Mrs. Holmes exclaimed one afternoon, practically bubbling over with excitement as soon as they stepped through the door. "Sheriff Morales, our wonderful deputy, he stopped by. He said that scoundrel who pretended to be my grandson, the one who tried to force me to sell my home, he's been arrested. They've opened a big case. Turns out they were part of a whole ring, a gang operating across the state. They'd seek out elderly folks who had no family or whose relatives had been out of touch for years, and then show up pretending to be long-lost loved ones. So, if it hadn't been for you, my sweet angels, I'd be homeless by now, or worse, feeding the fish in the river. Heaven forbid." The old woman quickly crossed herself, her eyes filled with profound gratitude as she looked at Clara. Clara, gently embracing her hostess, replied, "Oh, Mrs. Holmes, it was just a happy coincidence that we were here, nothing more." They spent a long time over tea afterward, and Clara shared her heartfelt desire to find her sister. Mrs. Holmes smiled mysteriously, a knowing glint in her eye. "Well, bless your heart, my dear, and why shouldn't you find your own flesh and blood? You know, after that whole ordeal with that impostor, I got brave myself. I finally tracked down my daughter-in-law, Bethany, through a wonderful young lady at the post office named Brenda. Brenda spends all day on that computer of hers. She helped me get my grandson Oscar's phone number through Michael's ex-wife. Oscar, unlike his mother, stayed right here in the country. So I called him. You wouldn't believe how surprised he was. His mother, it turns out, had told him for years that his father had died, and with him, his whole family, meaning us. Oscar and we just cried and told each other everything about all those lost years, as if we were afraid someone would interrupt us. But anyway, he'll be here next week. Clara was once again astonished by Mrs. Holmes's energy and sheer enthusiasm. This small, frail woman possessed an undeniable core of strength and a vibrant zest for life. It was then, seeing Mrs. Holmes's determination, that Clara firmly resolved that she, come what may, would find her sister. When they next visited Mrs. Holmes, about 5 days later, Clara had been busy with divorce proceedings. She and Finn were utterly stunned. They hesitated, afraid to even step into the familiar yard. On the garden gate, instead of the makeshift wire latch, there was now a beautiful wrought iron handle and a neat metallic latch. Clara and Finn exchanged a wide-eyed glance and, opening the simple latch, walked down the familiar path. Almost at the porch, they heard strange sounds coming from behind the house and instinctively walked in that direction. What Clara saw stole her breath away. In the clearing behind the house, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, stood what looked like a divine being. A tall man, perhaps 6 feet 6 inches in height, with muscles sculpted like something from a magazine. For a moment Clara completely forgot why they had even come. At that moment it felt to Clara as if everything happening to her had really occurred, a ripple from a forgotten dream. Mrs. Holmes stepped out of the house, her face alight with joy. "Oh, my darlings, you're here," she exclaimed. "Come, meet my grandson. He's arrived." Seeing Clara's startled expression, she immediately laughed and, turning more to her grandson, tried to explain. "Poor Clara, she's going to get all confused with all my grandsons, especially since I only have one true, real one, you. Clara, don't you worry. This is my actual true grandson." They both laughed then, a warm, easy sound. Oscar, indeed, was the complete opposite of his predecessor, the deceitful impostor. From their very first moments of conversation, Clara felt as if she had known him for 100 years. They could talk effortlessly about a myriad of topics, discovering countless shared interests. Oscar also had a keen understanding of business. It turned out he had a small but stable firm of his own. Hearing what had happened to the architectural firm her parents had built, he became thoughtful and promised to do everything he could to help. Finn was absolutely thrilled with his new friend and was even eager to spend the night with him. The moment he opened his eyes each morning, he would tug at Clara's hand every 5 minutes, pleading, "Please, can we go to Grandma Holmes's and Oscar's? We made so many plans today. I can't let him down." Clara would smile good-naturedly and reply, "Of course, sweetheart. No plans will come to fruition without you. But let's at least have some breakfast, and then we'll go straight over." With Oscar's arrival, they truly began spending every day from morning till evening at Mrs. Holmes's house. Afterwards, Oscar would walk them home, and Clara found she simply didn't want their time together to end. One evening, seeing the quiet glances passing between Clara and Oscar, Mrs. Holmes, with a mysterious twinkle in her eye, declared, "All right, my dears, here's the plan. Finn and I have decided to have a special story night tonight. You two, go on, go for a walk. There isn't much to explore around here, of course, but my dear Robert and I always loved to walk down by the river." Finn, his eyes lighting up, bounced with excitement, squealing, "Ooh, I get to stay with Grandma and listen to stories all night. And tomorrow morning there'll be pancakes with homemade jam." Seeing Clara's surprised look, he quickly explained, "Grandma promised. I didn't even have to beg." Everyone laughed, a warm shared moment, and looking at them, one could tell they were already a deeply connected family. That evening Oscar suggested they take Mrs. Holmes's advice and walk down to the river to see the beauty his grandparents had once cherished. The place truly was amazing and wonderfully quiet. Other than the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves, there wasn't a single sound. The setting sun painted the sky in breathtaking hues as it dipped below the horizon. That evening, Clara and Oscar sat by the river's edge for a long time, holding each other close, simply admiring the beauty. As he walked Clara home, Oscar stayed with her, and she was so glad. She knew deep in her heart that she wanted to be with him forever, and Oscar, it seemed, had no desire to leave her either. The next morning they arrived at Mrs. Holmes's, happily smiling and holding hands. Mrs. Holmes took one look at them and quietly said, "Well now, isn't that lovely? Good morning, you two. Come on, let's have some pancakes. Finn and I just finished cooking them." They ate breakfast outside at the new picnic table Oscar and Finn had built. When all the pancakes were gone and the cups held only the last sips of Mrs. Holmes's wonderful herbal tea, Oscar looked mysteriously at Clara and then said, "Grandma, sometimes you can know someone for 100 years and still not know what to expect from them. And then sometimes you meet someone and you just know deep in your soul that they are your person. Well, I'm not much of a talker, but this morning I asked Clara to marry me, and she didn't say no. Now we just have one small thing to sort out: her divorce from her ex." Finn suddenly jumped off his stool, tears welling in his eyes. "But what about me?" he cried. "Clara, you promised to adopt me. Am I going back to the children's home now? No, I won't go." He was on the verge of sobbing, but Oscar, scooping him up with a smile, said, "How could Clara ever be without you, buddy? She's with you forever now, and that means, if you're not against it, once you're adopted, I'll be your dad too." The little boy wrapped his arms around Oscar's neck, burying his face in his chest, and finally cried. The touching moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. "May I come in? My neighbours told me my wife might be here," the guest said. Even before seeing him in the dim hallway, Clara stiffened, recognising her husband's voice. She wanted to run, to hide, but Oscar, as if sensing her fear, took her hand firmly and whispered, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." The guest walked in and brazenly sat down at the table without an invitation. "Well, well, my dear," he began, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "You certainly tricked me, didn't you? Pretended to be helpless, barely walking, barely breathing. And look at you now, flourishing, a complete happy family. Dad, Mum, a harmonious household." Everyone sat, not understanding what was happening. Only Clara knew who this man was. She clenched her fists, holding on with all her might not to respond to the scoundrel. The uninvited guest got up, sending another pancake to his mouth, and continued. "So here's the deal. I won't give you a divorce until the very end. But even if you and your lover boy convince me, all your business in that apartment downtown will remain mine. And you, I'm afraid,
will have to start over in a shack with your beloved. You know, I've thought of everything, and the best lawyers will protect my interests."
Just as suddenly as he arrived, Clara's husband unexpectedly left without even a goodbye. That entire evening, a council gathered around Mrs. Holmes's small kitchen table. Oscar, Mrs. Holmes, and Sheriff Morales, who had stopped by chance, gave Clara advice on how to get a quick divorce and defend her interests in court. Sheriff Morales, as if remembering something, reached into his bag, quickly pulled out a notebook and said happily, "Well, it's good I always carry this. Write down this lawyer's number. She's a good one. They say I haven't dealt with her myself, but people praise her as an affordable and experienced specialist. Try her. Maybe she can help." Clara, having written down the number, went to the county seat the next morning, where the acclaimed lawyer had her office. Opening the office door, Clara almost fainted. The woman, she was almost certain, was her own only sister. Within a minute, they were crying, embracing, and showing each other the birthmark on their forearms, as if confirming their kinship. Though it was already clear, just by looking at them. From Alana, as the sister was called, Clara learned that their mother had been afraid she couldn't raise two daughters alone, and had placed one in the orphanage, while struggling to raise the other herself. Alana told Clara that their mother had passed away just a few months ago. It was then that she told Alana that she had a sister. "Honestly, I've been meaning to find you all this time," Alana said, as if justifying herself. "And here you are. You just came to me." Her sister turned out to be an excellent lawyer, and easily proved that Clara's husband had illegally appropriated all her inheritance. In no time, she shattered all his dreams of a colourful, rich future. Everything that rightfully belonged to Clara was won back and returned to its rightful owner. A couple of months later, there was a lively wedding in the village, attended by almost all the residents. At one point, the groom asked to speak, and looking at his wife, his voice trembling, he said, "I am incredibly happy that by coming to my grandmother's, after so many years, I found my happiness, my family. Now I have a wife and a son." He embraced Clara and Finn, who stood beside him. Clara, with a mysterious smile, suddenly announced, in front of all our guests, "I want to tell you, too, my love, you're going to be a father to two more little ones. I'm pregnant and I'm sorry, it's hereditary with twins." What happened then? It seemed the theme of the celebration immediately changed. Everyone was no longer just congratulating the newlyweds, but congratulating the future parents on such a joyful event.